What Helen Hadsell knew about Neville Goddard's I am technique. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to attract opportunities effortlessly while others struggle for years without seeing results? Why one person writes down a goal, imagines it for a few minutes, and somehow life begins rearranging itself around that vision, while another repeats affirmations every day and nothing appears to change? For decades, people have searched for the answer in books, seminars, and self help programs. They have experimented with positive thinking, visualization, manifestation techniques, and countless methods promising success. Yet, hidden inside the life story of one remarkable woman may be one of the clearest demonstrations of a principle Neville Goddard spent his entire career teaching. Her name was Helen Hadsell. She became known as the contest queen because she won hundreds of contests, prizes, vacations, cars, appliances, and cash awards. People assumed she was lucky. They assumed she knew secret tricks. They assumed she had special advantages. But Helen repeatedly insisted that luck had nothing to do with it. What she discovered was a mental process that sounds strikingly similar to Neville Goddard's famous I am teaching, a process built on identity, not effort, not force, not chasing, identity. And once you understand the connection between Helen Hadsell's method and Neville Goddard's teachings, you may begin to see why so many people struggle with manifestation despite doing everything they have been told to do. Because the real secret is not in what you want. The real secret is in who you are being. And that is exactly where Neville's I am principle begins. Neville Goddard often said that the words I am are the most powerful words a human being can speak. Why? Because whatever follows them becomes an assumption of identity. When someone says, I am successful, they are not merely describing a future possibility, they are claiming a state. When someone says, I am unlucky, they are doing the same thing. The subconscious mind does not carefully analyze whether the statement is true. It accepts the identity being assumed. Neville taught that life mirrors the concept you hold of yourself. If your dominant self concept is one of lack, life reflects lack. If your dominant self concept is one of abundance, life reflects abundance. The outer world follows the inner identity. Most people hear this and immediately think about affirmations. They assume they should repeat, I am rich, thousands of times. But Neville's teaching went much deeper than words. He was talking about consciousness itself, the feeling of being, the state occupied within. And this is where Helen Hadsell's story becomes fascinating, because although she did not teach exactly like Neville, her experiences reveal the same underlying principle. Helen did not focus on competition. She focused on identity. She didn't enter contests hoping to win. She entered them expecting to win. There is a huge difference. Most contestants looked at hundreds of competitors and wondered if they had a chance. Helen looked at the same situation and asked a completely different question. What would it feel like if I were already the winner? That subtle shift changed everything. She wasn't trying to become the winner. She mentally occupied the state of being the winner. Does that sound familiar? It should, because Neville taught the exact same thing. He called it living in the end, the practice of assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not someday, not eventually, now. Most people misunderstand manifestation because they remain psychologically attached to wanting. They want money, they want success, they want love, they want recognition, and every time they think about these desires, they reinforce the fact that they do not currently have them. The feeling of wanting keeps the desired outcome at a distance. Neville explained that wanting and having are different states of consciousness. One produces more wanting, the other produces fulfillment. Helen instinctively understood this. When she entered contests, she wasn't dwelling on uncertainty. She wasn't emotionally rehearsing failure. She wasn't imagining someone else winning. She was mentally identifying herself as the successful recipient of the prize, the winner. That identity became natural to her. And over time, the results became extraordinary. Imagine entering hundreds of contests and repeatedly winning. At some point, people begin asking questions. How is this happening? What is she doing differently? Helen eventually described her process with four simple words. You won't find complicated rituals, you won't find endless techniques, just 4 words. You have to believe. Simple, yet deceptively profound, because belief, in its deepest sense, is not intellectual agreement. It is identification. It is accepting something internally before external evidence appears. Neville often emphasized that faith is loyalty to an unseen reality, remaining faithful to an assumption even when physical circumstances appear unchanged. Most people can do this for a few minutes. Few can do it consistently. The moment external conditions fail to cooperate, doubt rushes in, fear returns, old assumptions reappear, the state collapses. Helen seemed unusually skilled at remaining loyal to her chosen outcome, and that loyalty is what made her different. Think about how most people approach goals. They constantly check reality. Has it happened yet? Where is it? Why isn't it here? What am I doing wrong? Every question pulls attention back toward absence. Every question reinforces the feeling that the desire remains unattained. Neville warned against this repeatedly. He said that looking for evidence too soon is like digging up a seed to see whether it is growing. The act itself interferes with the process. Helen behaved differently. She planted the seed and left it alone. She accepted the outcome mentally, then allowed life to unfold. This attitude created an extraordinary sense of confidence, not arrogance. Confidence. The difference matters. Arrogance tries to convince others. Confidence requires no validation. Confidence comes from certainty within, and certainty is one of the strongest signals you can send to the subconscious mind. The subconscious responds not to effort, but to conviction, not to repetition alone, but to feeling, not to desperate desire, but to accepted reality. This explains why many manifestation techniques fail. People repeat words while feeling the opposite internally. They say, I am wealthy, while feeling poor. They say, I am loved, while feeling rejected. The subconscious responds primarily to feeling, not verbal declarations. Neville knew this. Helen knew this. The inner experience always outweighs the outer performance. One of the most overlooked aspects of Neville's teachings is his emphasis on self-concept. People often focus exclusively on specific desires, a new job, a relationship, a business opportunity, more money. But Neville repeatedly pointed people back toward identity. Who are you being? What version of yourself are you occupying? Because every desire ultimately rests upon a corresponding identity. A wealthy life emerges from a wealthy self-concept. A confident life emerges from a confident self-concept. A successful life emerges from a successful self-concept. You cannot consistently experience what contradicts your identity. Helen's life demonstrated this principle beautifully. Winning became normal for her, not because contests changed, because she changed. The state became familiar, the identity became natural, and life reflected that assumption. This raises an uncomfortable question. What identity are you carrying right now? Not the identity you wish you had, not the identity you display publicly, the identity you genuinely feel, the one present when nobody is watching, the one active during quiet moments, the one revealed by your inner conversations. Neville taught that inner conversations shape reality. Most people underestimate this. They focus on external speech while ignoring internal dialogue. Yet the subconscious hears both. If your inner conversation is dominated by worry, criticism, limitation, and fear, those patterns become part of your self-concept. They become your state, and states produce corresponding experiences. Helen appeared to understand the importance of inner dialogue long before many others did. She refused to entertain thoughts that contradicted her chosen outcome. Not perfectly, not mechanically, but consistently. She directed attention toward success rather than failure, toward possibility rather than limitation, toward fulfillment rather than lack. This is not denial, it is selection. A gardener does not water weeds intentionally. A gardener chooses which plants receive attention. Your mind operates similarly. Whatever receives sustained attention grows stronger. Neville often described consciousness as the only reality, a statement many people struggle to understand. Yet when examined closely, the meaning becomes clearer. Every action originates from thought. Every achievement begins as an idea. Every creation exists mentally before appearing physically. The inner world precedes the outer world. Helen's victories seem to support this perspective. She consistently created internal outcomes before external outcomes appeared. First consciousness, then manifestation. First identity, then evidence. The sequence matters. Most people reverse it. They wait for evidence before changing identity. Neville taught the opposite. Change identity first, evidence follows. Helen lived that principle. Another fascinating connection between Helen Hadsell and Neville Goddard involves expectation. Expectation is one of the most powerful creative forces available to human beings. You can often predict future experiences by examining present expectations. People expecting rejection frequently encounter rejection. People expecting opportunities frequently encounter opportunities. Why? Because expectation influences perception, behavior, decision making, and emotional energy. It shapes what we notice, it shapes what we ignore, it shapes what we believe is possible. Helen expected favorable outcomes, not occasionally, habitually, and expectation gradually became self fulfilling. Neville would likely describe this as occupying a successful state, a state naturally generating corresponding experiences. Many people hear stories like Helen's and immediately object. What about hard work? What about skill? What about preparation? These things matter, but they are not separate from consciousness. A successful identity naturally expresses itself through effective action. A confident state generates different behaviors than a fearful state. An abundant mindset produces different decisions than a scarcity mindset. Inner assumptions influence outer actions. The relationship works together. Neville never suggested sitting passively and waiting for miracles. He suggested becoming the person who naturally experiences the desired outcome. Helen embodied this approach. She didn't merely dream about winning, she participated, she entered contests, she followed through, she acted from belief rather than doubt. That distinction changes everything. Because action fueled by fear feels very different from action fueled by certainty. One contracts, the other expands. One hesitates, the other moves confidently. One seeks validation, the other expresses conviction. The external behavior may appear similar. The internal state is entirely different. And according to Neville, the internal state is what truly matters. Perhaps the most valuable lesson Helen Hadsell offers modern audiences is that manifestation is not reserved for extraordinary individuals. She was not born famous. She was not born wealthy. She was not born with secret mystical powers. What she developed was a disciplined relationship with belief, a disciplined relationship with identity, a disciplined relationship with expectation, and those qualities remain available to everyone. The challenge is not learning another technique. The challenge is maintaining a new state. That is where most people struggle. They can imagine success for 5 minutes, but can they sustain it through uncertainty? Can they maintain faith when circumstances appear unchanged? Can they continue identifying with their desired reality before evidence arrives? Neville insisted this persistence is essential, not persistence in forcing reality, persistence in remaining faithful to a chosen state. The state eventually externalizes itself. That was his promise. Helen's life appears to illustrate the same principle from a different angle, and perhaps that is why her story continues attracting attention decades later. Because beneath the contests, prizes, and remarkable victories lies something far more important, a demonstration of consciousness in action, a demonstration of identity shaping experience, a demonstration of the power hidden within the words I am, not as a phrase, not as an affirmation, but as a declaration of being. Who are you? What are you assuming about yourself? What identity are you carrying into each day? Because whether you realize it or not, life is constantly responding to those assumptions. Helen Hadsell understood that. Neville Goddard taught that. And the invitation remains the same today as it was decades ago. Stop asking whether you can become the person you wish to be. Begin asking what happens when you assume that you already are. Because the moment identity changes, possibility changes. The moment self-concept changes, experience begins changing. The moment I want becomes I am, a different reality starts taking shape. And perhaps that was the secret Helen Hadsell discovered all along. Not how to win contests, not how to attract prizes, but how to occupy a state so completely that life eventually has no choice but to reflect it. The question is not whether the principle works. The question is which identity you are choosing to live from today. Because every future begins with an I am, and every manifestation begins the moment you believe it.